All right, so here we go to do a quick walkthrough on how I 3D model buildings from scratch. So we're looking at a building here in Edmonton. First I go into Google Maps, take a screenshot and save it. Upload that picture into AutoCAD, do some measurements, make sure it's about the same size. So here I am just taking some measurements of the length and width of the building, putting it into AutoCAD, making it the same size in AutoCAD. So if it's 100 meters long, when I type in 100, it'll make a line the length of the building. Easy for future measurements when inserting known sizes of things like doors and whatnot, and just to keep everything to scale. So here I'm just taking more measurements. I'm writing a lot of these down on a piece of paper beside me just to keep track of them all. Now I'm starting to design the tower. Here I'm counting the windows to kind of, because I noticed that the windows seem to be perfectly square. So using those as like a scale and a gauge there. And then I noticed that the panels between the windows vertically were about 1.5 times the height of the window. So here I'm spacing that out. So I counted how many windows were in a row, and then I counted how many floors there were on the building just to give me an idea on those numbers. I believe it's 26 windows across and then 10 floors in the building. This building is located in Edmonton. It's the Clark Builders Center. They just remodeled the outside. It's currently white in more modern or in more recent photos as opposed to that brown color. When I go back and forth between Google Street View and Google Earth and Google Maps, you can see it, like see the difference. Like there, you must have noticed a few times. So yeah, I'm just taking some basic measurements and doing the initial rough shapes of the building. So with this building here, it's a parking garage and a building, so I have to model both, and I can't see myself printing this bigger than about 400 millimeters in length, so just over a foot. So I'm kind of picking and choosing what I'm going to model because it's so small you're going to lose a lot of the detail anyway. So kind of just going to do the walls and the floor and not really pay too much attention to anything else. If it were a larger model, like if I were making a house that big, we would be adding way more detail. But in this case, it's just going to be kind of what you can see from Google Earth. So here I'm also just rounding some things off. So whereas my measurements may have told me that the building was like 38 point whatever meters long, I'm just rounding it to 38. So because like a lot of this, people will never notice the scale being off a little bit. I will, again, just round numbers. So I usually have it as a door being 7 feet tall, and then in a house from the floor to the ceiling 8 feet, and just leave it at that. It's about the standard anyway, so I'm not that far off. I'm just not putting in the inches or any like decibel or like decimals of any kind. So yeah, here I'm just going and doing the larger rough shapes here. In a lot of instances, if I can get out to the building itself, I'll drive out there and drive around and take some pictures and just get an idea of like just some things that Google Earth and Google Street View might not be able to show me. However, this building here is a really good candidate for just eyeballing everything from Google Earth and Street View because there's so much information. Where like the Google Street View vehicle drove pretty much around the entire building. So I did drive out to it though, just to get a better idea of how some of the parking garage aspects mesh together. But yeah, for the most part, if it was just a house, you wouldn't have to drive out to see it. You can just do it all from the ground of, like it had these kinds of pictures and computer generated 3D models from Google Earth. So I'm always double checking my measurements, because from Google Earth and Google Street View and just Google Maps, you'll notice that the measurements are not like that close. Like one of them, it'll say it's 38 meters is the width of like the tower, whereas the other one says like 42 meters or even like up to like 50 meters. So you'll have a pretty big difference in scale, like 25%. So with that, as long as you're going off of the dimensions from one of them is like your master, to always say like, okay, this is going to be it. And then just like eyeball it between the 3 different websites, that's fine. But don't measure the width of the building on Google Maps and then the length of the building on Google Earth, because you're going to end up with it being out of scale. Anyway, just adding some more details here, trying to figure out this ramp that goes up from one of the parkade levels to the next. Sometimes you'll model everything and then you get to a certain point and you go to put on one of these ramps or a stairwell or something like that, and because of you just kind of winging it in terms of dimensions and whatnot, the angle of that ramp might be pretty extreme, and then it'll make you like second guess yourself as to like what you're doing, because like you're like, oh, there's no way like a car ought to be driving up a ramp that's like 20 degrees, but in reality it might just be that. And also no one's really going to notice when it's a model, and if they like say anything, you can just like tell them it's like an illusion because it's like a tiny model, you don't realize it or whatever, but no one's really going to nitpick it. So here in the early model here, I'm choosing not to model that ramp down into the lower level because I don't think anyone's going to notice it. So it just ends at a wall when you go down that ramp, but I might go back and fix it later. And then here I'm just trying to get everything to line up so it's like aesthetically pleasing and true to the original design. If things just look better, like if things just look better if you move a thing a little bit over and whatnot, and like everything just lines up a little nicer, I say do it, because no one will notice that in real life, because the building is so big that interior wall doesn't match up perfectly with an exterior fixture kind of thing. But on a model, you're able to look down on it. So I highly recommend you just line everything up so it looks nice. Take some creative licensing or creative liberties. So here I'm putting in the like columns that support the building and kind of just measuring it out, like kind of eyeballing it, where I notice that there's 5 running one way and 4 running the other, and then kind of like spacing out how far they should be from the edge of the building. It's never a bad idea to go back and fix things either. You just got to be honest with yourself on it and be like, oh, I made a mistake. I just need to go back, and like the last 20 minutes have been a complete waste of time. And it happens all the time with stuff like this. The only way, like even if you have blueprints to like a building, you'll see that at the last minute they made some like small changes. The blueprints and what you're seeing in real life don't line up. So then here underneath the parking garage on like the first level here, there seems to have been like some kind of a car dealership. And I'm not going to model that out because this model, if I were to print it to like the size that I'm designing it to, would just be over a foot long. So doing any modeling of that little car dealership that's underneath the parking garage, no one's ever going to see that detail ever. Like, so for now, I'm just making it a big block, and then I might go throw in some garage doors and vents on the sides of the building that face into the alley. So here I'm modeling the little stairwells that go from the upper, or the staircases that go from the upper parquet level to the lower one there. And those are some things that people will notice if you don't add them. Like definitely all the details on the top. When it comes to other things, like if a person can drive by it in a car, or if they walk by it, like you definitely need to put those details in. You can't really skip out too much on them. But like in this case, I didn't know how many stairs there were on this little staircase, so I just winged it. I'm like, well, like a step is probably this big, so yeah, it's probably going to be about 4 steps. And like I put it in, I'm like, oh, it's too steep, that's probably, so instead of it being on like a 45 degree angle, I'll put it on roughly like a 35 degree angle here. And then I go pop that in and it fits perfectly and off I go. I'm not going to dwell on that. These HVAC units, these HVAC units that are for that car dealership below here, like people like drive by it. So I'm trying my best here to replicate them as best I can in terms of just like basic shapes. I did end up driving by them to get a better look at them the other day, so I might go back and tweak those models, because what I wasn't quite making out here is on the Google Earth 3D model, there's like, it just looks a certain way, and then you drive up next to it and there's like a chain link fence around that, which makes sense. Of course they'd have that, but anyway, that chain link fence there was kind of disrupting the 3D model. Also, these little boxes here that I'm currently designing, I didn't know what they were like at first. I didn't put too much thought into them, but after driving out, I noticed that they were stairwell entrances. So here, they like should be the proper height, but I'm not like certain if they are. So later I'll go back and I'll see like how tall a door is. And driving out, I noticed that like the stairwells were about twice the height as a door. So I'll go and make sure that that's all correct. So I decided to put in the little like chamfer here that's on the bottom of the walls that's true to the actual building, just because I found that was like a feature of the building that like make it stand out, like it's a defining feature of it. So I spent the extra little time to add it. So something too, I'm using AutoCAD because that's what I'm most familiar with. I've been told that Google SketchUp and like SolidWorks and Blender, all of those, you're able to do this. However, I'm not familiar with them as much as AutoCAD, so that's my software of choice. But in this, I'm not welding any of these objects together as I used to like simplify things. I would weld and then like cut pieces out. But I found that it's just easier not to weld anything and to do it like that. It just makes it easier to edit or move things around later if you have to totally like change anything. Because in this case where I'm modeling from the top down, if I were to make it to the bottom and realize I've been modeling it incorrectly, rather than having to cut out layers of a parking garage from top to bottom and just have this headache of like a job there, you can just like delete them or move things out of the way and put them back later. So here I'm noticing that where all of the layers of the parking garage are like staggered from top to bottom as seen from the sides, and with the little ramps in between them as you saw from the roof, one of the first layers to drive up into the parking garage, that's on a slant, and I'm just trying to get that to work here, as well as noticing that the columns from the building part go down into the floor there, into walls. So I'm just matching all of that up so like it looks good. So like the columns that you see through the parking garage line up with the walls supporting it on the ground. So something else is one of the benefits of going on site to look at this. And if you can't, try to get a person that can go on site to just take some pictures and just walk around and take pictures, like, or drive around in their car as I did and take pictures here and there. It's from Google Maps and Google Earth there. It looks as if the building almost goes all the way to the ground, but that's not true. The building pretty much, like, the first floor of that building like starts at the top of the parking garage. So when you drive around at the top of like the parking garage, you can pretty much drive underneath the entire building up there. And there's just about 20% of the building like footprint actually goes like down to the ground, it seems. So that's something in this that I didn't know. I was just going off Google Earth and decided to just have a larger footprint go from the bottom of the building structure right down to the ground. So that's the thing that I would go and change and like shrink that up. Now, depending on the model, a person might not see that, but if you have the time, or if you like did some proper reconnaissance, you can like factor that into your initial design. So something else too, it's if I were to make this to scale, like what I thought the width of the window trim was and whatnot, when you go to export it and print it into like Prusa Slicer or Cura, a lot of these details will not come up because they're like too thin. So you have to kind of know the width of like what's the smallest width you can have for like the printer to pick it up. So in this case, I had it wrong. I thought it was another number. So here I just went with that. But then later on in the video, when I go to preview what the print will look like, it doesn't include any of these window trimmings, and I have to go back and have to fix it. And then there's me saving it, and yeah, here I am in Prusa Slicer, and I go in and like I zoom in and I'm just making sure I can see everything, and then sure enough, I can't see any of the vertical window trim that I had just added. Even if I like keep blowing it up, it's not coming up. So I have to go in and I have to make them all a little bit bigger and then try it again and again. It's been a few weeks or months since I've modeled anything to get ready for print. So I used to have all these numbers just memorized, and like again, the vertical window trim's not coming up. And it could all depend on the like the quality, the settings of your like 3D printer. So you have to tweak around with that through like the software of your design and like the software of like the print to ensure that they line up so you're actually getting all that info out. Because I have like spent hours in 3D modeling like buildings only for them to not actually show any of that detail. And then here I am again just trying to figure out how big that lower building like has to be so it just like kind of lines up at first glance. Also, something else is those columns supporting the parking garage. If I were to make them to scale, they would probably not even like come out in the print, or be so flimsy that if anyone were to try to like, you know, put too much force on the digital print itself, it could just break all of those columns. So I just made them like a little bit bigger. They're going to come up a little later like in the print. So here's an example as to why you don't weld everything, because here I had to like do some tweaking, and had I welded that, I would have been there for like probably like 3 or 4 times the length, just carving out that detail or just like fine tuning it. So here I am spending too much time on an area that's in the alley that even if like no matter what I would have done, no one would have really noticed like too much of it, but I'm just trying to make it look as like close to like what it is in real life as I can. Yeah, just nitpicking. Here I am adding the storefront on the first floor while also working on the alley, just going back and forth, making sure everything kind of lines up and is aesthetically pleasing. And here I am trying to get those window trim to come up on the print. So I'm just exporting the tower itself and looking at it. I'm playing around with the settings here. And I noticed that not all the vertical trim is coming up, just some of it, but I figured I'd come back to it later. Now here I am looking at the end of the parkade from the alley here and just like getting a better idea on how it all works out. That one box part of it, I didn't quite understand what it was to later find out that it was a stairwell, just a large one, to just figure out how everything fits together well. Yeah, I'm just constantly adding little pieces to, paint the picture a little better and like making sure everything lines up. And I keep going back and forth between like Google Earth and this to constantly like re-reference what I'm doing just to get a better idea for it. Making sure everything's lining up and kind of like fixing or just making it look nicer than it might be in real life in terms of how things line up and geometrically. And again, spending all this time on a location of the building that probably 10 or 20 people actually see every day, and then for the model at the end, like no one would have noticed had I just totally winged this and not like try to make it so perfect. But it's something I want to see, so thought I may as well do it. The way that this parkade is just the way that it, just the design of it, it was really like throwing me off here with the overhangs of the parkade and like how it's just like a flimsy fence on the end, not necessarily a larger like concrete wall. Just kept messing me up for some reason. So here's where I've decided that I'm going to put a little more effort into some parts that you might not see right off the bat, just in case, or just because there's like so much of an opening underneath the parking garage. As when you drive up to it from the main road, essentially the first 2 floors are just open space, so you could see all that. And in the model, that would have been big enough that like had a person just looked underneath, they would have like seen that I didn't model any of those ramps or like anything. So I decided to go in and do that. Just like model them in. So I had removed that wall and extended the pillars here. And then I realized that you can't really see underneath that ramp. So instead of it being a ramp, I just turn it into a wedge. It'll just be truer to the actual design while being a little more structurally like sound there. And then here I am looking from like the back alley to ensure that it all makes sense and is true to the model or to the actual building. So here I am making all the columns a little bit bigger just to like strengthen them up for when I have to print them. Here I am putting them throughout the building as they are in real life and just dropping them all down a bit so they're not poking out from the top of the print itself. And no one's going to go and like measure the distance between these columns and call me out on it. So I just went and kind of like made an array of the columns and just went from there. Whereas driving around it, I noticed that there were some that may have had different like spacings between them, but no one's going to notice that. And yeah, here I'm wasting my time fixing this, the edge of that wall there, and no one's ever going to notice it. Yep, and that's how I modeled that. Any other tweaks will be so minor that it might not even be worth putting on film. Thanks for watching. Bye.